Step outside now. This discussion is over.
Not until you explain why my ticket means nothing.
Move. I expect this seat whenever I fly.
Expectation isn't a reservation. This seat is mine.
Check both tickets under the same standard. Sir, why are you standing out here?
Because someone erased what actually happened.
The system now claims he never boarded.
The gate agent looked at the boarding pass, then at Marcus Webb, then back at the boarding pass. He did it twice. The machine had already flashed green. Sir, could you scan that again? The reader sometimes pulls the wrong cabin. Marcus held his phone steady and let the agent scan it a second time. Green again. Seat 2A, Charlotte to Boston. Priority, Group 1. The screen was clear enough for both of them to read. The agent nodded without meeting his eyes and without saying anything else. Marcus stepped forward. Behind him, Jade shifted the weight of the Safe-Air case between her hands. The hard shell was marked with a white label on the lid. Calibrated equipment, handled with care. She had spent the better part of the previous evening running a final systems check. The sensors were stable. The calibration module had held its reading through 3 consecutive tests. She had printed the airline approval form and slipped it into the front pocket of the case, just in case. The second agent waved her over before she could scan her own pass. Could you open that for me, please? Jade set the case flat on the counter and released the latches. She explained the sensor array, the battery specifications, the wireless module. She pointed to the approval form. The agent studied it, then studied the case, then studied the form again. The line behind Jade thickened. People leaned to see what was happening. She answered every question without rushing and without raising her voice, though she had answered the same questions at check in less than 40 minutes earlier. When she finally closed the latches and lifted the case, she saw the agent nod to his colleague with the kind of slow exhale that meant she had been more cooperative than expected. Marcus had been watching from several feet away without saying a word. 2 minutes later, Catherine Harmon approached the priority lane. She carried a structured cream handbag, large enough to hold a small laptop, a document organizer, and whatever else a woman like Catherine Harmon considered essential for a 90-minute flight. Her assistant Lisa walked half a step behind with a leather document bag and a second tote. Their passes were scanned once. Neither woman was asked to stop. Neither bag was opened. Jade watched them cross into the jet bridge. Then she looked at her father. You noticed that? I did. Why didn't you say anything? Marcus waited until they were walking again, the gate noise fading behind them. One mistake can be careless. A pattern is something else. Jade glanced back at the 2 gate agents. One of them was already talking to the next passenger. Neither of them was looking her way. When do you know the difference? When the explanation keeps changing, but the result stays the same. The jet bridge windows framed the aircraft, sitting under a pale Charlotte sky. Jade's grip tightened around the case. She had been preparing for the forum for nearly 2 years. The Safe-Air sensors measured temperature, particulate matter, humidity, airflow, and carbon dioxide. They compared every room against the same thresholds around the shards of zip code, building age, or the neighborhood outside the window. In Boston, a panel of engineers and public health officials and community directors would evaluate which projects deserved a year-long pilot. The program was worth $480,000. Jade had rehearsed every slide. She still checked the latches twice. Marcus had booked 2A and 2B so she could spread her materials during the flight, arrive in Boston without fighting for overhead space, and have enough stillness before the hands would be steady. He had not chosen first class to make a statement. He had chosen the simplest arrangement that gave Jade the best chance of walking into that auditorium ready. Inside the aircraft, they found their row. Jade slid Safe-Air beneath seat 2B and pulled out her laptop. Marcus checked their arrival time and the shuttle connection to Cambridge. The cabin filled slowly behind them. A few passengers moved through the aisle with the careful efficiency of people who traveled often and had learned to take up exactly the space they needed. B. Then Catherine Harmon stepped into the row. She stopped in the aisle as though someone had placed an object in her path. Her eyes moved from seat 2A to Marcus to seat 2A again. Her expression did not shift into anger or confusion. It settled into something quieter and more absolute than either. The expression of someone who had decided a fact about her life was being violated. Get out of that seat. She did not lower her voice. B. The first class cabin was small. She wanted it to hear her, and it did. You don't belong here. Marcus did not move. He had one hand resting on the notebook he had placed on the tray table. He looked at her with the particular stillness of a man who had heard a version of this before and had learned that stillness was more precise than anger. Jade had been watching the senior to flight attendant, Diane Foster, appear at the end of the row B. Diane looked first at Catherine's cream suit and gold watch. She looked at Marcus's coat, which was charcoal gray and worn smooth at the cuffs, carefully brushed, but clearly old. Then she looked at the boarding pass already open in his hand. Sir, may I see your boarding pass? Marcus gave it to her. Diane held it for a long moment. Photo identification, please. Marcus produced his driver's license. B. The name matched the boarding pass without any difficulty. B. Do you have the original reservation confirmation? Marcus opened the airline app and showed the booking. 2 seats purchased together, 2A and 2B, transaction confirmed, receipt attached, and the card used for payment. B. Jade looked up from her laptop. Marcus met Diane's gaze. His stillness became more exact. Why would you need the payment card after a boarding pass, a license, and a confirmed reservation have all matched? B. Diane's chin lifted slightly. B. I'm trying to determine whether there was an upgrade involved or a booking that transferred from another account. There was no upgrade. Both seats were purchased at full fare 6 weeks ago. B. Marcus showed her the card and pointed to the final 4 digits matching the reservation record. I purchased this seat. My daughter purchased hers. Neither of us has transferred anything. Catherine adjusted her handbag. B. I always sit in the second row on this route. Everyone on this crew knows that. B. Diane turned toward her with an expression that was approximately apologetic. Jade had been watching the sequence from the moment Diane walked in. B. She had seen which face the apology went to before anyone had established that a wrong had occurred. B. She had seen Diane request 4 separate documents from her father while not once asking Catherine Harmon for so much as a boarding pass. Mom, please, I'm traveling with him. Then allow him to answer for himself. B. Diane tapped her tablet and entered something into a note field. Jade caught enough of the screen to read the first 4 words. Travel companion, interrupting crew. She looked at the seat map visible in the corner of the screen. B. 2A Marcus Webb, 2B Jade Webb, 3D Catherine Harmon. Diane angled the tablet toward her body before Jade could read further. From across the aisle, B. A woman named Rachel Norris lowered the magazine she had not really been reading. B. She had been on this route enough times to know what a seating dispute looked like and what it usually meant when the documentation requests kept multiplying. B. She set the magazine flat against her lap and quietly unlocked her phone. Diane stepped into the galley and stood with her back to the cabin. Her tablet screen glowed against the metal partition. B. She was not looking at the seat map anymore. She was looking at the corporate account flags on the passenger list. B. The Harmon Hotel group notation sat just below Catherine's name in red lettering. Major account, executive travel, priority handling flagged. Jade watched her from 2B. She could not read the screen from that distance, B, but she did not need to. She had seen enough of the sequence to understand what Diane was weighing. It was not the evidence. The evidence had been simple since the second Marcus showed his boarding pass, B. What Diane was weighing was something else entirely, B. Catherine stood in the aisle. She had not moved toward 3D. She had not offered to check her own ticket. She stood in the aisle with her handbag against her arm and waited for the calculation to finish. It finished in under 2 minutes. Diane returned from the galley and addressed Marcus with the careful softness of someone delivering news they expected to be unwelcome. Mr. Webb, we have a situation with cabin configuration that I'd like to resolve as quickly as possible. She held the tablet angled away from him. We can seat you in 24C and your companion in 28D. You'll receive full service compensation for both seats and a $300 travel credit each. Jade looked toward the rear of the aircraft. Those seats aren't together. They are the best available at this time. Marcus remained in 2A. His voice was exactly the same pitch it had been since Catherine arrived. Why are two confirmed passengers being moved instead of the one passenger in the wrong seat? Diane glanced toward Catherine before answering. She did it quickly, but not quickly enough. The crew has the ability to adjust seating for operational reasons when departure timing requires it. What operational reason? Marcus asked. The question carried no heat, which seemed to trouble Diane more than heat would have. His stillness forced her to provide an answer that would stand on its own, without any room for emotion to fill the gaps. We need to accommodate a corporate traveler whose account has specific service requirements. Jade closed her laptop. That is a commercial preference. You said operational reason, Catherine gave a short laugh. She was not amused. This is becoming emotional. Jade looked at the 3-seat numbers visible on the corner of Diane's tablet. I am reading what is printed on the tickets. Diane stepped back and reached for the Surface phone on the galley wall. Her voice dropped, but the first-class cabin was small, and several passengers were no longer pretending not to listen. Douglas, I need assistance in first class. She paused, then continued in a lower register. A male passenger in 2A is challenging crew authority, and his companion is escalating the interaction. Rachel Norris looked up from the phone she had been holding face down against her thigh. She had been recording since before Diane made the call. Jade had caught the words. Challenging crew authority. She turned them over in her mind. Marcus had not refused a safety instruction. He had not blocked the aisle. He had not raised his voice. He had asked 2 questions about a seat that belonged to him, and Diane had described that as a challenge that had technically occurred. Daniel Park Cartay stood near the galley in the corridor, Cartay partially blocking the corridor. So he was watching Diane's tablet with an expression Jade could not quite read. His eyes moved from the screen to Catherine in the aisle, then back to the screen. His mouth opened slightly as though he were going to say something, and then it closed. Rachel lowered her phone to her lap, but kept the screen on. From across the aisle, a man in a gray blazer shifted toward the window. A woman 2 rows back leaned forward and tilted her head. The cabin had gone quiet in the particular way of people who wanted to watch without being scenes watching. Catherine set her cream handbag on the site next to her, not 3D, the seat across the aisle from Marcus. This is a courtesy issue, she said, smoothing her jacket. The airline knows how to manage important accounts. It isn't personal. Jade looked at the seat Catherine was resting her handbag on. Then she looked at the seat Marcus was sitting in. The only seat Catherine had looked at since walking down the jet bridge was 2A, not any of the 4 other open seats in first class, just the one her father was sitting in. It isn't personal, Jade said quietly. She was not speaking to Catherine. Marcus looked at her. I know, she said. That's exactly what makes it a pattern. Richard Stone arrived 4 minutes to Diane's call. He entered the cabin the way managers arrive when they have decided the situation before they see it, taking in the overview first, the specifics only when necessary. His eyes went to Marcus, then to Jade, then to the boarding passes, and only lastly to Catherine, standing in the aisle. Mr. Webb, the crew has explained the alternative seating arrangements. The crew has verified that these are our assigned seats, Marcus said. Airlines have the right to make adjustments during boarding to maintain efficient operations. For what operational reason? Richard produced two electronic vouchers and held them up as though the gesture would replace an answer. $300 each, a reasonable accommodation. Marcus studied him. Please put the reason in writing. A short pause settled between them. Richard's eyebrows came together. Excuse me? Identify the passenger currently occupying the incorrect seat. Identify the passengers being asked to move. State the operational basis for the change. Name the employee authorizing it. And note that neither my daughter nor I consent to any seat modification. The flush rose along Richard's neck in a slow, even wave. We don't have time to turn a seating adjustment into a document review. Jade opened the notes application on her phone and began entering timestamps. The moment Diane first verified the tickets, the time Richard arrived, the moment the vouchers appeared. Richard noticed. What are you doing? Keeping a record. That isn't necessary. Then your account should support it without any problem. Richard looked at Marcus again. His voice hardened into something that was trying to sound like authority and landing just short of it. If you continue to question lawful crew direction, you may be removed from this flight for non-compliance. Rachel shifted in her seat. He hasn't refused anything. Richard did not acknowledge her. His attention stayed on Marcus. Marcus looked around the cabin. Phones had risen in quiet increments. Passengers who had been careful to appear occupied were now watching openly. Jade's jaw was tight, but her hand stayed still over the screen. She was still typing. Marcus stood slowly. I do not consent to a downgrade. He retrieved his coat from the overhead compartment. I'm going to step onto the jet bridge so this conversation doesn't continue in front of every passenger in this cabin. He looked at Jade. Bring the case. Jade closed her laptop, pulled Safe Air from beneath 2B, and stood. They moved toward the aircraft door with the careful courtesy of people who had decided that dignity was worth more than the argument. Neither of them blocked the aisle. Neither of them raised a voice. As they passed Catherine, she shifted to let them through. A slight satisfaction moved across her face. It lasted only until Lisa leaned close and whispered something Jade could not hear. Catherine's expression closed. Diane watched them cross the threshold. Then she turned to her tablet. Then she turned back to her tablet. The record was already waiting to be written. On the jet bridge, the air was cooler and smelled of metal and jet fuel. Jade set Safe Air down beside her as ground crew moved beneath the wing. The aircraft engine produced a low hum that resonated in the floor. Behind them, the door to the cabin remained open. In front of them, the terminal felt a long way off. Marcus stood with his phone in his hand. He was not looking at the screen. He was looking at the thin strip of tarmac visible between the door frame and the jet bridge wall. Jade leaned a case against her leg. I thought we were going to Boston. We are going to Boston. It doesn't feel that way right now. Marcus didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was even. We have the tickets. We boarded. We sat in the seats we paid for. He paused. Everything else is someone else's decision to explain. Jade pressed her thumb against the latch of the Safe Air case without releasing it. She had spent nearly 2 years on the device. The sensors were designed to read what was actually present in a room rather than what the room looked like from the outside, not the neighborhood, not the age of the building, not the income of the people who used it, just the actual air, measured against the same standards that applied everywhere. The panel in Boston would decide whether 10 community centers in Massachusetts and North Carolina would spend a year testing it in their libraries and health clinics and meeting rooms. She needed to be there. She needed her equipment intact. She looked through the open aircraft door. Catherine Harmon was settling into 2A with the ease of someone for whom space rearranges itself as a matter of course. Lisa placed the second tote beneath the seat and opened the window shade. Neither of them looked toward the jet bridge. Lauren Mills, a gate employee, stood way down the jet bridge with a handheld scanner and a passenger manifest on a small tablet screen. She was moving between the seat map and the physical list, with the look of someone trying to reconcile two records that were not matching cleanly. Jade approached. Can you show me the change history on our reservation? Lauren's head came up. That's internal system data. I'm asking what changed in our booking. We're the passengers affected. Lauren hesitated, then turned the screen slightly to check the record herself. The angle gave Jade more than Lauren intended. The line near the top read Marcus Webb, not boarded. Below it, behavior notation, agitated, questioning. Below that, accommodation status, voluntary accepted. Jade read each line before Lauren pulled the device back. He was on that aircraft. Jade kept her voice steady. He scanned through the gate. He sat in seat 2A for several minutes before walking out here. The record says not boarded. That is not accurate. Lauren's eyes moved between the screen and the door to the terminal. He never accepted any accommodation. No one asked him to sign anything. No one read him a form. Lauren's mouth opened and closed. Marcus had come to stand behind Jade without appearing to crowd Lauren's space. Who made those entries? Lauren swallowed. I don't have visibility into who enters individual notes. You can see the timestamp. Lauren looked at the screen without responding. The timestamp was there. Richard Stone appeared from inside the terminal, his stride brisk. He saw them at Lauren's screen and moved faster. Step back from that device, please. He positioned himself between Lauren and Jade. You are not authorized to review internal passenger records. Marcus looked at him. Who entered the word agitated? That notation is based on the crew report. Did you watch the interaction before entering it? Richard folded his arms. Caroline described you as confrontational. I approved it based on her report. Jade looked at the timestamp beside the behavior notation. The entry had been made before Richard arrived in the cabin, before any formal refusal had been recorded. The label had been applied, she realized, while Marcus was still sitting calmly in 2A, asking reasonable questions about a seat that was his. She opened her notes and added the timestamp to her record. Marcus stood straighter. Do not alter any other field in that record until someone reviews the complete audit trail. Richard's jaw tightened. You do not have the authority to direct Apex Airways employees. I am a passenger whose record has been falsified. I am asking you to preserve it. Richard looked between Marcus and Lauren with the discomfort of a man who wanted to give an order and was uncertain what the order should be. Lauren's eyes had not left the screen. She had stopped tapping. From the terminal end of the jet bridge, footsteps sounded. They were brisk, organized, and coming faster than a single person moved alone. Sandra Wells appeared first. She was regional operations supervisor for the Charlotte hub, reviewing the afternoon departure schedule from the terminal side when the delay notification for flight D48 had appeared. She had come to assess the extent of the problem. She walked in with two operations supervisors behind her. Her eyes moved across the jet bridge in the practiced order of someone used to arriving at situations that were already complicated. Richard Stone's expression, Lauren's frozen hands, the equipment case on the floor, the boarding passes no one had asked her about. Then she saw Marcus. She stopped. The two supervisors nearly walked into her. Her face changed before she spoke. Not her professional face. Her actual face, the one that existed before the title and the access badge and the years of departure windows and incident reports. It changed the way a face changes when the mind is trying to fit an unexpected fact into a situation that had already been assigned a shape. Chairman Webb. Richard turned. Lauren froze with one hand over the device. Inside the cabin, Diane looked through the open doorway. Catherine stopped mid-sentence to Lisa. The title moved through the space faster than an announcement would have. Marcus did not move toward the aircraft. He did not ask for 2A. He looked at Sandra, and then at the boarding pass on Jade's phone, which had gone from blue to gray sometime in the last few minutes. His eyes were steady. His voice was quiet. How did a passenger who scanned onto this aircraft become not boarded without returning through the gate? Sandra Wells did not issue an apology first. She issued an order. Lock that reservation. She said it to Lauren without taking her eyes off Marcus. Lock the full passenger record for flight by D428. Nothing gets entered, modified, or deleted until compliance gets here. Lauren's hand moved to the screen, but one of the supervisors stepped forward, and placed his own badge against the device. Leave it. He looked at his colleague. Get the audit log open on the ops system. I want a full entry history from the moment this flight's manifest was first built. The second supervisor was already on her radio. Richard Stone had not moved. He stood in the middle of the jet bridge with his arms still folded, but the posture had changed from authority to something closer to a man, trying to remember which version of events he had given to whom and whether they matched. Sandra turned to him. Who made the voluntary accommodation notation? Richard cleared his throat. Diane entered the note. I approved it based on her report from the cabin. Did you verify it independently? I spoke with Mr. Webb directly. Did you verify the seat assignment independently? Did you look at the original reservation before approving the change? Richard's jaw worked. Sandra turned away from him and looked at Marcus. Mr. Webb, I can return to 2A and 2B immediately. Marcus did not move toward the aircraft. That corrects the seats. It doesn't correct the record. Sandra's eyes went to the gray boarding pass on Jade's phone. The two supervisors beside her were already comparing the gate scan log, one of with the current manifest on the ops tablet. Marcus Webb scanned at 746. He has no final boarding status in the system. The record shows passenger not boarded with a voluntary accommodation code applied. The second supervisor spoke. Jade Webb is still listed as on board with no assigned seat. Sandra looked at the screen and Harmon, the supervisor, searched. Originally 3D, currently shown in to a consent field, blank. There was no recorded acceptance, Sandra said. Not through the app. Not a signature. Not a verbal confirmation logged by a witness. Jade watched Sandra's expression move through several calculations very quickly. It was the expression of someone who was beginning to understand the dimensions of what they were standing inside. Marcus asked his questions without raising his voice. He had 6 of them. Who changed my boarding status? Who marked the accommodation voluntary? Why is my daughter recorded on board while the passenger traveling with her has been removed from the manifest? What specific action does the word agitated refer to? Why was I required to show the payment card when the passenger claiming my seat was not? And did anyone request her boarding pass before approving the change? Each question landed in the space between Richard and the operations supervisors. Richard's tie had loosened slightly. He looked between Marcus and the tablet in the supervisor's hands as though he were hoping one of them would offer him an exit. He cleared his throat again. There was time pressure. We were trying to protect the departure window. Marcus looked at him. The ticket resolved the question. Everything that came after the ticket was a choice. Sandra turned to the supervisor. Freeze the entire passenger record, not just the booking, every associated entry. Then she called Patricia Hayes. Patricia was Apex's Director of Compliance and Passenger Protection. She had been reviewing quarterly incident reports in the Charlotte Operations Center when Sandra's call came through. She listened for 45 seconds. Then she asked how many entries had been made and whether the audit trail was intact. Sandra looked at the screen. Yes, it's intact. I'm on my way. Jade had already opened her email. She sent her timeline to herself, then saved a second copy to cloud storage. The timestamp registered before anyone in the jet bridge could claim the sequence had been refreshed after impact. Inside the cabin, Diane tried to refresh the seat map on her tablet. The screen returned a message she had not seen before. Record locked, modification unavailable, contact compliance. She looked toward Richard through the doorway. He had not looked back at her in several minutes. The two operations supervisors continued working through the flight record. One of them compared the boarding scan timestamps with the final manifest. The other examined the full audit trail for the reservation. Every keystroke had been logged. One supervisor leaned toward Sandra and kept his voice low. B. The behavior notation was entered at 8:17. He looked at the passenger timeline Jade had sent to her own email, and which she now held up for the supervisor to view. Mr. Webb's questions about the seat began at approximately 8:12. The notation was entered 5 minutes into the conversation. Before he walked toward the door, Sandra absorbed that. The other supervisor found something else. He turned the screen. B. The seat map entry for Harmon was made at 8:29. That's 2 minutes after Mr. Webb crossed the aircraft door. He found Catherine's entry. No consent recorded. B. The field was left blank, and the change was pushed through under a crew adjustment override code. Richard was looking at the floor. Marcus stood near the window of the jet bridge. The aircraft was still there. B. Ground crew still moved beneath the wing. The same pale Charlotte sky pressed down on the tarmac. B. Nothing on the other side of the glass had changed in the past 20 minutes. The world outside had not registered any of what had occurred on this side of it. Jay stood beside him. Is this what it always looks like? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Sometimes one person is believed and the other is documented. The documenting started before I asked a single question. B. Patricia Hayes appeared at the terminal end of the jet bridge with two compliance specialists. She carried a case that opened into a portable workstation. She looked at the locked screen, B, at Lauren still standing without moving, at Richard with his loosened tie, and at the two operations supervisors already deep in the flight log. Then she looked at Marcus. I'll need to speak with everyone involved separately, she said. She said it to the jet bridge generally. B, Marcus Webb and Jade Webb, Diane Foster, Richard Stone, and I'll need the passenger until A made available as well. Her gaze went to Sandra. The aircraft stays on the ground until we understand what happened to this record. Sandra had already picked up her radio. The order went to the captain at 8:31. Hold position. Keep the door open. Do not close the boarding seat sequence. 9 minutes had passed since Marcus Webb had walked out of seat 2A. The cabin speaker activated at 8:33. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a message from your gate team due to an administrative matter requiring immediate resolution. All passengers aboard flight day 428 are asked to and proceed to the jet bridge for a brief identity and seating verification. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your patience. The voice were Prasam's.
The words were precise.
They still carried the sound of something that had gone wrong in a way that a form could not fully contain. Inside first class, the confusion moved slowly at first, like weather arriving from a direction no one had been watching. A woman in 3C looked up from her book. A man across the aisle from her removed his earbuds. 3 rows back, someone asked their seatmate what administrative matter meant and got no answer because no one had one. Asked Catherine Harmon did not move. She sat in 2A with her handbag on her lap and her posture very straight and an expression that had spent the past 30 minutes practicing certainty and was now showing the first signs of the effort that certainty required. She had heard the announcement the same way everyone else had. She had understood the absurd way everyone else had. This is absurd, she said. Her voice was not loud. She said it to the cabin rather than to anyone specific. The entire flight is being delayed because one man cannot accept a seating decision. From the jet bridge through the open aircraft door, Jade heard her. She did not turn around. The first passengers reached the jet bridge within 2 minutes. A woman from row 6, then a man from 4C with a carry-on. That caught the door frame. Then a family from the middle cabin who moved with the practiced efficiency of people who had spent years navigating airports with children. They emerged into the jet bridge and saw the operations supervisors, Sandra Wells, Patricia Hayes, and Marcus Webb. Several of them looked at Marcus. Their faces carried the expressions of people reassembling a story they had heard only from one direction. One of the supervisors directed passengers to wait near the terminal connection and explained that verification would be brief. E. The manifest rebuild required visual confirmation of every passenger and every seat number. The process was not optional. Catherine appeared at the aircraft door. B. She was carrying her handbag against her arm and her second tote in her opposite hand. Her posture had not changed. Her certainty had not changed. B. What had changed was that the certainty was now performing itself for an audience she had not expected to be watching her. Diane appeared behind her. B. I need to board, Kath said to no one, and in particular, I've been more than patient. Diane said quietly that the order applied to all passengers. Catherine's chin came up. Then have someone tell me specifically why I'm being asked to leave a seat that a lead need been resolved. Patricia directed the workstation. Patricia turned from the workstation. Mrs. Harmon, I'm Patricia Hayes, Director of Compliance. We are conducting a review of the passenger record for this flight B. As part of that review, I need all passengers to confirm their seat assignments against the original manifest. Catherine looked at Patricia, then at Sandra, then at Marcus B., who was standing near the window with his coat folded over one arm, watching the line of passengers without appearing to watch them. And I assume he is the reason for this review. The record is the reason, Patricia said. B. She said it without any particular emphasis, which was more effective than emphasis would have been. B. Catherine walked to the holding area near the terminal. Lisa followed without speaking. The passengers continued to emerge from the aircraft. Some had their phones out. Some had been recording since before the announcement. One man near the galley, who had boarded quietly in seat 7A and spent the past 40 minutes pretending to read a document, walked out and stood enough close to the operations workstation to hear what was being said. B. Aaron, no, Daniel Park, came out after the last passengers cleared the cabin. He was holding his phone against his leg. He stood near the edge of the group, watching Diane, who was standing alone near the galley entrance, B, and Richard, who was standing very still near the window and had not said anything in several minutes. Daniel looked at Patricia. Patricia noticed, B. She crossed the distance between them and spoke quietly enough that the surrounding conversation covered her words. B. If you have something relevant to the review, you can provide it now. It stays within the investigation file. Daniel looked at his phone. B. I photographed the seat map twice during boarding because the cabin tablet sometimes loses its meal preferences when the connection drops, and I didn't want to forget the orders. He hesitated. B. The first image was taken at 8:04. The second was taken at 8:29. He unlocked his phone and turned it toward Patricia. B. The first image was clear. 2A, Marcus Webb. 2B, Jade Webb. 3D, Catherine Harmon. The map showed every seat as it had been assigned at the moment of booking. No conflicts. The second image, taken while Marcus and Jade were on the jet bridge, showed something different. Catherine Harmon now appeared in 2A. The seat assignments for Marcus and Jade both read pending reassignment. Patricia looked at the timestamp, 8:20. 9B. Her eyes moved to the ops system. The entry showing Catherine in 2A had been made at 8:29. The images were taken within the same minute the entry was made. Daniel still hadn't fully exhaled. If I give you these, Patricia said, they're part of the record. You're a witness.
Has anyone pressed you what to say, not say, to see yes incidents? Macy, we see, say, to us, I done this incident.
Daniel's eyes went to Diane, then back to Patricia. B. No one has said anything to me directly, but I know how complaints get handled here. He looked at the floor, or how they don't get handled. Patricia closed the cover of her workstation. B. Any retaliation against a witness in this investigation will itself be a compliance violation. That commitment is in writing. She held his gaze. You have my word, and you'll have it in print before this flight is resolved. B. Daniel unlocked his phone again and handed it to Patricia without speaking. B. Jade was close enough to have heard most of it. She looked at her father. Marcus was watching Rachel Norris, who had been standing near the gate counter since she exited the aircraft and who had not put her phone away once. Rachel met his eyes. She did not say anything. She held up the phone briefly, screen out, and then lowered it again. The jet bridge had filled with approximately 60 passengers, two operations supervisors, a director of compliance, a regional supervisor, a gate manager with a loosened tie, a flight attendant who had stopped making eye contact with anyone, and a second flight attendant holding a phone with both hands as if it were fragile, and Marcus Webb, who stood near the window looking at the tarmac, wearing a coat with worn cuffs, holding nothing at all. The aircraft was still on the ground. The record was locked. The audit trail was intact. The only thing that remained to be determined was how far the story went before it reached someone who would read it honestly. Patricia Hayes opened the audit log on her workstation while the compliance specialists positioned themselves on either side of her. The log was not difficult to read once the full entry history was visible. Difficulty was not what the log presented. What it presented was a sequence that was very clear and very damaging. The first entry in Marcus's file had been made at 8:07. It was Diane's notation. Possible upgrade mismatch, seat 2A. She had typed it within minutes of the first time she looked at Marcus's boarding pass. The pass had been valid. The license had matched the final four digits in the reservation. None of that information had changed between 8:07 and the moment Diane made the entry. They not be. What had changed in those minutes was that Catherine Harmon had walked down the aisle and invoked the Harmon Hotel Group account name. The next entry at 8:17 was the behavior notation. Agitated. Questioning. The timestamp confirmed what Jade's notes had already shown. The entry had been made while Marcus was still seated in 2A. He had not stood. He had not approached anyone. He had answered Diane's requests and asked two questions in return. Those questions were now classified in the airline's record as behavioral misconduct. Richard had approved both entries from his own device at 8:22. He had not requested the original reservation. He had not reviewed the seat history. He had taken Diane's summary and moved it forward. At 8:29, 2 minutes after Marcus stepped through the aircraft door, seat 2A had been reassigned to Catherine Harmon. The consent field had been left empty. The change had been pushed through under a crew adjustment override, which required a documented operational reason. The reason entered was passenger accommodation, preferred seating. Passenger accommodation was not an operational reason. It was a preference. The software had accepted it anyway. Patricia turned the screen toward Diane. What made the accommodation voluntary? Diane's hands had come together in front of her. He stood up and left the seat. Before or after Richard warned him that he could be removed for non-compliance. Diane looked at the floor. The silence was not ambiguous. Jade stepped forward and handed Patricia her phone. The timeline she had started in the cabin was on the screen. Patricia looked at it without rushing. She compared each timestamp in Jade's notes against the audit log entries on her workstation. They matched within seconds. 8:12, Marcus shows first boarding pass. 8:15, Diane requests license. 8:16, Diane requests reservation confirmation. 8:17, behavior notation entered. 8:19, Diane requests payment card. 8:22, Richard approves notation. 8:25, Richard presents vouchers. 8:27, Marcus steps toward door. 8:29, Catherine entered in 2A. The label had arrived before the action. The label had named Marcus as agitated at a moment when by every available account, he had been sitting still. Rachel Norris came forward with her phone. She had transferred the video to a shareable file before Patricia had even asked. The footage ran for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. It showed the first-class cabin from the perspective of seat 4B, angled slightly toward row 2. Marcus Webb appeared in the lower left frame throughout. He was seated. His hands were visible. His voice was low enough that the recording captured tone and rhythm rather than every word. But the compliance specialist who reviewed it with headphones said afterward that there was no moment in the footage where Marcus raised his voice, moved from his seat before standing to leave, blocked the aisle, approached Catherine, or refused a safety instruction. It also showed clearly at the 2-minute mark, Diane returning to the aisle and requesting the payment card. The footage showed Catherine Harmon sitting across the aisle in an unclaimed seat, handbag on her lap, watching the exchange. Diane did not turn toward Catherine once during the interaction. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Diane picked up the service phone and began speaking. Rachel had zoomed the frame slightly at that point, not enough to read lips, but enough to catch the expression on Diane's face as she spoke. Not distress, not uncertainty, something more like relief, as though the call resolved a problem she had been trying to solve. Lisa Mercer, she walked into the row. Lisa Mercer stood near the gate windows. Her arms were crossed and her expression had moved from smooth to careful in the time since Patricia arrived. Patricia approached her. Mrs. Harmon's assistant? Lisa confirmed it. Do you travel with Mrs. Harmon frequently on this route? Yes. Was she assigned to seat 3D today? Lisa's arms tightened slightly. We were told the seats were 3C and 3D. Did she know that? Boarding opened again. Lisa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I showed her the seat assignment when we checked in, and she chose to stand in row 2. We both knew the Harmon Hotel account had priority handling flagged. Patricia waited. Lisa looked at the gate windows for a moment. Then she unlocked her phone and opened a message thread. She held the screen out. The message had been sent from Catherine's number at 7:59 before boarding opened. It was addressed to Lisa. Tell the crew 2A is non-negotiable. Apex wants this account. Patricia read it twice. One specialist photographed the screen without being asked. Catherine, from across the holding area, had been watching Lisa's movements with the particular attention of someone who knows something is happening they cannot stop. When Lisa lowered the phone, Catherine walked toward them. I never told anyone to alter a record. No one has said you touched the system, Patricia replied. We're determining whether commercial pressure caused employees to abandon procedure. Catherine folded her arms. Then determine it quickly. Every minute this flight sits on the ground is a minute. Apex is losing money it cannot recover. Patricia looked at her for a moment and then looked back at her workstation. Every minute this investigation sits unfinished, she said, is a minute. A falsified record sits in your airline system. She said it to Marcus, not to Catherine. Marcus did not respond. He was looking at the compliance specialist on Sandra's left, who had stopped scrolling, and was studying something on the prior incident screen with the careful focus of someone who has found a thread they were not sent to look for. The specialist looked up from his screen and said Elise slowly, which was not Patricia's name, but the name he was used to using with his previous supervisor, and then corrected himself. Patricia. He turned the screen toward her. These phrases keep appearing in older files. He listed 3 of them aloud. Agitated questioning. Uncooperative during verification. Satisfied with accommodation. Patricia came and stood beside him. She read the first thus, then the second, then the third. Her expression did not change, which was more alarming to the people watching her than if it had. The first file belonged to a woman named Renee Jackson. She was a registered nurse from Greensboro who had traveled on Apex 7 times in the previous 18 months, using the same mileage account. On the trip in question, she had been assigned a window seat in premium economy for a flight to Atlanta. A business traveler had wanted the same seat. When staff asked Renee to move 2 rows back, she asked why the passenger occupying the wrong seat was not being moved instead. She asked twice, and she asked calmly. The gate video showed her standing beside the counter with both hands on the handle of her carry-on. Feet together, voice low. She did not raise the handle. She did not touch the counter. She did not interrupt anyone. The incident report described her as challenging staff in an aggressive manner. Richard had closed the complaint 48 hours later as a service misunderstanding. He had not re-interviewed Renee. He had not contacted the two passengers listed as potential witnesses. B. He had not requested the gate video. The file contained a note that said the matter was resolved without further escalation. B. There was no record of what made it resolved or who had been satisfied by the resolution. The second file was Dr. Harold Freeman. He was a retired professor of American history who had been flying to a conference in Baltimore. His premium seat was confirmed. A frequent flyer had claimed the same seat and asserted loudly that there had been a system error. Stat asked Dr. Freeman to show the credit card used to purchase the ticket. B. The frequent flyer was not asked for a card. He was not asked for anything beyond his boarding pass. Dr. Freeman pointed out that both passengers should be verified under the same standard. B. The employee report called him uncooperative during payment verification. The resolution praised the staff for maintaining order. B. No one in the file explained why Dr. Freeman had been subject to payment verification in the first place, or why the standard had not applied to both passengers. B. The third file was Calvin Brooks, who owned a regional electrical contracting company in Raleigh and had flown Apex for business travel for 6 years. He had chosen a window seat because he intended to work during the flight without the distraction of aisle traffic. 5. A frequent flyer with higher status had wanted the same seat. An employee had told Calvin that continued discussion could affect his departure. Calvin had moved to an alternate seat. B. The system recorded that he was satisfied with the arrangement. His written complaint, filed 2 weeks later, said the opposite. He had moved because he believed refusing would mean missing the flight. B. He had not been satisfied. He had been afraid. Richard had not interviewed Calvin after the initial complaint. He had not reviewed the seat history log. He had not asked to see a supervisor's approval for the change. B. He had closed the file within 3 days. Patricia looked at the specialist. B. Same station manager, same manager for all three. He scrolled to the top of each file, and same phrase structure in the narrative summaries. Patricia looked at Richard Stone. Richard had stopped trying to appear composed. B. His tie was fully loosened and he had moved slightly apart from the group, as though distance from the files would reduce their connection to him. Marcus looked at Jade. B. She was reading the phrases on the compliance screen from several feet away. B. Those words don't describe what those people did, she said. No, Marcus said. They describe what the people who wrote them needed to say. Douglas made no comment on the 3 files. He opened his mouth once and then looked at the screens and closed it again. There was no operational data in any of the 3 cases showing that the seat change had been necessary. No documentation of a safety concern. No record of a second manager reviewing the decision. B. There was only a pattern, and the pattern had a shape that anyone looking at it honestly would recognize. Ask the passengers to move. Apply pressure so they move without a formal protest. B. Use language afterward that makes the passenger sound unreasonable. Close the case before a second opinion can be sought. The only variable in the pattern was the word used to describe the passenger. Aggressive. B. Uncooperative. Agitated. The words were different. The shape they made was the same. B. Patricia looked at Marcus. Did you know about these cases? No. Do you want to know the outcome of each one before we continue? Marcus considered the question for a moment. Tell me after we finish the current review. Patricia nodded. The compliance process comes first. Jade had been Lisa Mercer, who had moved to a bench near the lap, staring at a spot her hands into her lap, and was seat turned on the floor between her feet. B. Lisa had worked for Catherine for 4 years. She had managed schedules and prepared briefings and organized travel for 87 trips. In those 4 years, if anyone had counted, B, which she had because she had an organized mind and found comfort in accurate numbers. She had known this morning that their assigned seats were 3C and 3D. B. She had shown Catherine the confirmation on the app at check-in. She had not been surprised when Catherine walked to row 2. B. She had simply followed. That was the part that Jade could not stop thinking about, not Catherine's certainty, not Diane's calculation. the following: the quiet E. Efficient following of someone who had decided that what their employer wanted was the same as what was right, without ever stopping to check whether that equation held. Patricia was still working through the files. One of the specialists had opened a database of seat assignment overrides at the Charlotte hub going back 18 months. He was sorting by manager ID. Richard Stone's name appeared more frequently than anyone else in the field. This is going to take longer than the departure window allows, Sandra said quietly to Patricia. I know. Sandra looked at the aircraft, still sitting at the gate with its door open and its ground crew still working beneath the wing as though something ordinary were about to happen. She picked up her radio for the second time in 20 minutes and called Operations Control. Catherine Harmon crossed the holding area with the stride of a woman who had ended many meetings by standing up and walking toward the door before the other person was done speaking. She stopped 2 feet from Marcus and did not look at Patricia or Sandra. She looked at Marcus with the direct, flat attention of someone who has decided to speak to the only person in the room who actually matters. Langley Hospitality walked away from a $65 million deal till 2 years ago because one airline failed to meet expectations on a single transatlantic route. She paused to let the number settle. The Harmon Hotel Group accounts for $48 million in projected annual bookings through Apex over the next 3 years. If this investigation continues in its current direction, that agreement will be under review. She said review the way people say it when they mean something else. I'm prepared to withdraw entirely. The jet bridge went quiet in the particular way it goes quiet, when everyone present understands that a large number has just been introduced into a room where facts are being examined. Sandra looked at Marcus. The operations supervisors looked at Marcus. The compliance specialist, who had been scrolling through files, looked up from his screen and looked at Marcus. Everyone in the holding area who had not yet looked at Marcus looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Sandra. Please pause the contract review process. Catherine blinked. An independent committee will evaluate the Harmon Hotel Group agreement. He said it the way someone reads a statement, prepared before the meeting, the voice of someone who had already thought through the consequence before the threat arrived. Until that committee completes its review, no further contract activities associated with that account will be processed. Catherine had come to this moment prepared for anger. She had come prepared for public declaration, for a confrontation she could document as personal retaliation. She had not come prepared for this, for the simple clean removal of the money from the room where facts were being examined. Not a fight, not a spectacle, just a door being closed quietly. You would risk $48 million over a seat dispute. Marcus looked at her for a moment. The committee will determine what the seat dispute was part of. The investigation determines what it was part of. Those two processes are not the same, and they will not affect each other. Catherine turned to Sandra. I want to return to my seat. The matter was already resolved before your compliance team arrived. She said already resolved with a particular emphasis that assumed everyone present had forgotten how the resolution had been achieved. Sandra answered without looking up from the operations workstation. Your assigned seat remains 3D. If Flight D428 resumes boarding, you are welcome to board in that seat. Catherine looked at the aircraft door, at the empty gate area behind them, at Lisa, who was still sitting with her hands folded on the bench, not meeting anyone's eyes. Then she looked back at Sandra. I will not sit in 3D after being subjected to this publicly. Then you will not board, Sandra said. Catherine stood very still. That stillness was different from Marcus's stillness. His was the stillness of a man who had decided that the most precise response to an unreasonable situation was to remain exactly as he was. Hers was the stillness of a woman trying to determine whether the situation had in fact stopped being manageable, whether the customary tools had stopped working, whether the power she had walked into this gate area carrying was still the kind that opened doors. I am going to Kaiman to contact the Apex board directly. B. I have relationships with 3 board members. That is your right, Patricia said. I am going to have outside counsel here within 2 hours. Patricia said the investigation will continue. B. I am going to ensure that every executive associated with the Harmon account understands what happened this morning. Sandra finally looked up. The investigation will continue. Catherine folded her arms. B. Her voice cooled into something more controlled and therefore more final. I will not be sitting in 3D. B. Sandra set down the radio she had been holding. Then you won't be boarding. Catherine turned and walked to the far end of the holding area. Lisa followed. B. The distance between them and the group near the workstation expanded to about 20 feet, which was as much distance as the jet bridge allowed. B. Catherine sat with her back very straight and her handbag on her lap and her phone pressed to her ear, making calls to people whose names Jade did not know, and B. whose ability to change what was happening here was smaller than Catherine appeared to believe. Patricia watched the tablet for another minute. Then she spoke to Sandra and the 2 operations supervisors. B. We cannot rebuild the passenger manifest in time to hold the departure window. The seat map entries conflict with the physical boarding scans. To confirm who is actually on this aircraft, B, we would need to rescan every passenger against their original documents. That process takes approximately 45 minutes minimum. B. She looked at the aircraft. With Diane Foster unavailable and the remaining crew under investigation hold, we don't have the staffing to complete the safety briefing, even if the manifests were clean. She said it plainly. B. Flight D428 needs to be canceled. The cancellation order came from Operations Control at 9:18. The gate speakers activated for the second time. Ladies and gentlemen, B. Flight D428 has been canceled due to an administrative matter requiring resolution. B. All passengers will be provided with rebooking assistance. We apologize for the disruption. Please see an Apex representative at the gate counter for assistance. The reaction moved through the holding area in waves. B. First surprise, then frustration, then the particular anger of people who have been waiting with their patience in hand and have had it used up. B. Several passengers called family members to explain they would not be arriving when expected. B. A woman near the window began calculating whether she would miss a connecting flight and determined from her expression that she would. A man in his 60s pressed his knuckles against his mouth and stared at the floor. Some passengers looked at Catherine. Some looked at Diane. Some looked at Richard. A few looked at Marcus. He walked to the gate counter before anyone asked him to. He stood out a microphone and without a prepared statement, and spoke in a voice that was clear enough to carry across the holding area without effort. I want to apologize for what Apex failed to do this morning. A confirmed seat should require no explanation beyond the ticket. Every passenger in this area had a right to board without conditions placed on documents that were already valid. That failure was mild enough to hear the Dreadmine to correct. The area was quiet enough to hear the jet bridge hum. B. He promised rebooking on the next available flights for all passengers. Hotel accommodation for anyone who could not travel until the following day. Ground transportation. Full reimbursement for missed connections. B. Documented and verified. Direct contact with an Apex representative before anyone left the gate area. He did not explain the investigation. He did not name anyone. He did not tell the story of the morning. B. He said what the airline owed these passengers, and then he stopped speaking. B. Jade stood near the window and watched people lower their phones for the first time since the announcement. Several passengers who had watched Marcus with suspicion when he first sat in 2A were now listening to him with something closer to attention. She felt no satisfaction. The boarding passes had been valid before Sandra recognized her father. Teagle, the questions had been reasonable before anyone called him Chairman B. The record had been falsified while the cabin was full of people who did not know his title and who for the most part had kept quiet. She looked at Safe still in its case at her feet. The sensors had not moved. The calibration had not changed. The device read whatever was actually in the air, not whatever someone had decided should be there. She pulled the case a little closer. B. The investigation took 19 days from the date of the incident to the date the final report was submitted. B. Patricia Hayes conducted it without any involvement from Marcus Webb or Sandra Wells in the assessment of individual responsibility. She had said that clearly at the jet bridge, and she had kept her word. B. The employees were interviewed by investigators who did not report to the chairman's office. The witnesses were contacted in the order their evidence appeared in the audit trail. B. The airline's own system log provided more information than any single person's account could have undermined. Diane Foster received the investigation's findings in a meeting room at the Charlotte Operations Center. The room had a rectangular table and 4 chairs and a window that faced the interior courtyard, not the tarmac. There was sat with her hands flat on the table and listened. Diane sat with her hands flat on the table and listened. B. The report found that Diane had reviewed 3 valid seat assignments and knowingly treated only one of them as questionable. The notation describing a possible upgrade mismatch had been entered without a factual basis. B. The behavior notation had been entered before any refusal had been recorded and before Marcus had done anything beyond ask 2 questions about a seat that belonged to him. B. The voluntary accommodation notation had been applied to a passenger who had stated explicitly, B, and in the presence of witnesses, that he did not consent. None of these entries were errors. None of these entries were errors. They were choices made in sequence in less than 30 minutes. Diane looked at the signature line of the termination letter for a long time. She asked finally whether one morning could erase 12 years of service. Patricia, who was not required to answer the question and chose to do so anyway, B, said that one morning had revealed how Diane had used the authority she had built during those 12 years. Diane did not argue after that. B. She signed where she was asked to sign and left the building through the same exit everyone used. Richard Stone's review took longer. B. The investigators found that he had not only accepted Diane's entries without independent verification. They found that the pattern in his closed files extended across 18 months and 17 separate incidents. B. In case after case, the sequence held a black passenger with a valid seat assignment, a competing claim from someone with higher status, or a valued corporate account. B. A documentation request applied to one party and not the other. B. And a resolution that moved the black passenger somewhere less desirable and closed the file with language describing the passenger as the source of the difficulty. No case had reached the compliance department. B. No witness had been contacted in any of them. B. No seat history log had been reviewed. The only thing that had been reviewed consistently was the corporate account flag attached to the other party. Richard Stone was dismissed from Apex. B. His final statement cited schedule pressure and understaffing. The investigation report acknowledged that both were real problems. B. It noted that neither explained why the pressure consistently resolved itself by asking black passengers to surrender confirmed seats. B. The reforms that followed were developed by a working group that included frontline employees, legal counsel, B, the compliance department, and 2 outside passenger advocacy organizations. Marcus attended one meeting of the working group at the beginning to explain what changes were needed and why. B. He attended no subsequent meetings. He left the design to the people who would have to live inside the system. The first reform addressed seat overrides. B. A confirmed seat assignment could be changed only for a documented operational reason approved by a second manager who had not been part of the original interaction. B. The approved reasons were specific and listed. They included mechanical requirements, safety necessity, and weight and balance documentation. They did not include customer preference, loyalty tier, B, commercial account value, or executive relationship. The software was updated to reject override attempts that cited these as reasons without a secondary code. The second reform addressed behavior documentation. An employee could not enter a term like aggressive, hostile, uncooperative, or agitated without specifying the observed behavior in factual terms. The record had to state what the passenger said, at what volume, whether a threat was made, whether an aisle was blocked, and whether a genuine safety instruction had been refused. Questions about seating. Documentation standards or reasons for requests could not be coded as misconduct by themselves, regardless of the tone in which they were asked. The third reform removed certain complaint categories from local management entirely. Any complaint involving unequal documentation requests, differential seating treatment, or assumptions about a passenger's identity or status based on appearance went directly to the independent compliance team. The station manager at the originating airport could submit evidence. The manager could not close the complaint. Apex then contacted the passengers in the 17 files Richard had closed. Most of them had not expected to hear anything. Renee Jackson received a formal apology that stated, specifically that her calm request for clarification had been misrepresented in the incident record. Dr. Harold Freeman received a full reimbursement of his ticket cost and a written acknowledgement that the payment verification requirement had been applied to him and not to the other passenger. Calvin Brooks received a correction to his file that showed in the record that would follow him as an Apex passenger that he had not been satisfied with the accommodation. He had moved under pressure. The file now said so. Each case was reopened. Compensation followed the findings. Marcus read the final reports alone in his office late on a Thursday evening. No camera captured the moment. He paused over the phrase voluntary accommodation accepted. He read it 3 times. He thought about what those words had been designed to look like in the system and what they had actually concealed. Jade knocked on the open door. He looked up. She asked whether changing the words inside the system would actually change the people using it. Marcus first closed the file. Not by itself, he said, but it makes it harder for the system to lie on their behalf. Jade stood in the doorway for a moment. Then Shay asked if he wanted to get something to eat before reviewing the Safe Air pilot agreement, which had arrived that afternoon from the Foundation in Cambridge. He did. They left the building at 9:38 on a Thursday evening in late autumn, and the Charlotte tarmac outside was lit with the same amber lights it always was at that hour. And somewhere on the aircraft parked at the gates, the names on the seat maps were exactly the names of the people sitting in those seats, which was a thing that had always been supposed to be true and was now, because of one very specific morning, something the system was required to verify. 3 days after the cancellation of flight D428, Apex restored Marcus Webb and Jade Webb to seats 2A and 2B on a replacement flight to Boston. Not new seats under a courtesy reassignment, say coach, original reservation reopened under original booking number, confirmed under the names that had appeared in the seat map since the morning Marcus' spouse purchased both tickets 6 weeks earlier. The distinction mattered to him. He did not want a record that said the airline had given them something after the incident. They were receiving what they had already purchased. The paperwork should say so. At the aircraft, Jade slowed. Several passengers waiting to board behind them were people who had been at gate D12 3 days earlier. A few of them recognized Marcus and Jade immediately. Some reached for phones. Others looked away. A woman in a green coat glanced at Safe Air and back at Jade and then at her boarding pass as though she were checking something. "We could sit farther back," Jade said. "It might be quieter." Marcus looked at the boarding passes in her hand. "We paid for these seats. Keeping them is not a statement. It's just keeping them." They took 2A and 2B without explaining themselves to the cabin. Marcus put his coat in the overhead bin. Jade slid Safe Air beneath 2B and unlatched the case for a final check before the door closed. The connection light on sensor 3 failed to activate. Jade's face tightened. She ran the check again. The other 4 sensors responded within standard parameters. Sensor 3 stayed dark. It was working at the hotel this morning. Marcus leaned closer. The case had been carried through the airport twice in 3 days. Lifted by inspection officers, set on counters, moved across the jet bridge. The connector near the calibration board was a small pin fitting, precise enough to do its job in stable conditions, and vulnerable enough to loosen under the kind of handling that assumed nothing fragile was inside. He looked at Jade. "Do you have the toolkit?" She had it in the front pocket of her carry-on. She pulled it out and unzipped the narrow sleeve. Marcus held the calibration module steady against the tray table, while Jade worked the connector with a flat-headed tool smaller than her thumbnail. The sensor housing was designed for clean room conditions. The procedure required patience. The passengers around them settled into their seats, opened laptops, pulled out headphones. The door closed. The engine noise built beneath them. Jade worked through the taxi sequence with the tool angled against the connector, adjusting, releasing tension, trying the contact point again. Marcus held the module without moving. The tray table vibrated slightly as the aircraft turned onto the runway. After 11 minutes, the connection light blinked on. Jade watched the display until the reading stabilized. Then she closed the housing, engaged the latches, and let out a slow breath. "It's accurate." Marcus nodded. Then he slid the tray table back and looked out the window as the runway disappeared beneath them. They landed in Boston at 4:47 in the afternoon, 3 days later than planned. Jade had missed the opening sessions of the forum, the equipment orientation, and the first round of panel presentations. The forum coordinator had called after that cancellation story appeared in a regional news outlet and offered to let Jade join the final session. The following morning, provided the equipment met the technical specifications submitted in advance. Jade had thanked her and confirmed the specs, and spent the evening recalibrating SafeAir in her hotel room. The Cambridge Innovation Center auditorium held about 90 people when it was full. It was not quite full the morning Jade presented. Rows of engineers and public health officials and community directors and 2 foundation trustees sat in fabric facing a low stage. A table at the front held laptops, a projector, and a single podium with a flexible microphone arm. Jade arranged SafeAir beside her laptop while the previous presenter finished answering questions. Marcus sat in the last row. He wore the same charcoal coat. He had no assistant with him. His name was not on the program. From where Jade stood at the front of the room, he looked like a man who had driven a long way to see something that mattered to someone he cared about. Jade began with the buildings. The ones SafeAir was designed to serve were not the buildings with building management system and real-time air quality dashboards and facility staff whose entire job was environmental compliance. They were the older ones, the neighborhood libraries that had not been updated since the 1980s, the community health centers running on budgets that left no room for specialized monitoring, the recreation centers where kids came after school to buildings where the air had not been measured since the original inspection certificate was filed. SafeAir measured those buildings the same way it measured any other. Temperature, particulate matter, humidity, airflow, carbon dioxide. Not compared against what the building looked like from the outside, not adjusted for the neighborhood or the age of the plumbing, or whether the city had prioritized this block in the capital improvement budget. Compared against the same thresholds that applied everywhere. If the reading fell outside those standards, the device issued an alert. It did not decide in advance what the air quality would be based on what the building was. It read what was actually there. One of the foundation trustees asked about maintenance cycles. One engineer asked about sensor replacement costs. A public health official from the North Carolina team asked about data export formats. and whether the readings could integrate with existing state reporting systems. Jade answered each question with the precision of someone who had spent nearly 2 years knowing these questions were coming and preparing for them. The final question came from a woman in a gray blazer at the center table. She was a program director from a regional health foundation that had funded 6 environmental monitoring projects in the past 4 years. She had been taking notes since Jade began. She looked at Sayfair, then at Jade. What was the hardest lesson you learned while developing this? Jade held the question for a moment. She did not look at the device. She looked toward the back of the room. Marcus was sitting beneath the dim wall lights in the last row, his coat still worn at the cuffs, his hands in his lap. He was not watching the panel. He was watching her. She faced the program director. A system fails when it decides the answer before reading the evidence. She said it without explaining what she meant. She did not tell the story of gate D12. She did not mention the morning that had put her 3 days late to this room. She returned to the technical results without elaboration, finished the calibration demonstration, and answered 2 more questions about maintenance documentation. Sayfair was not selected for the forum's largest grant. Another project received that funding, and it was a strong project, and the choice was defensible. What Sayfair received was a year-long pilot program across 10 community centers, 5 in Massachusetts, and 5 in North Carolina, funded at a level that would cover equipment, installation, maintenance, and a full data review at the end of the term. It was not a perfect outcome. It was a real one. Outside the auditorium, the afternoon had turned cold and bright. The sky over Cambridge was the kind of blue that appears in autumn when the warmth has finally gone and the air is clear enough to see the outlines of things at a distance. Jade stood on the steps with her coat buttoned and Sayfair under her arm. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. When Diane asked for the card a second time, Marcus reached into his inside pocket and took out his wallet. He opened it to the card sleeve and removed a folded piece of paper. It was a boarding pass. The paper was soft at the creases from having been folded and refolded. The ink was still legible. Marcus Webb, 2A, T, Flight D428, Charlotte to Boston. He held it between 2 fingers and looked at the name printed above the seat number. "Because the ticket should have been enough," he said. Jade looked at the boarding pass, the same one that had flashed green at the scanner, the same one that had been in his hand when Diane first asked to see it, the same one the system had briefly claimed did not exist. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at her father. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that a ticket, a booking, and a name should be enough, let us know in the comments. We read everyone.